It's that time again. Monster Hunter Wilds has all its content out. There's no more monsters or new updates to come. The base game is over. All that's left to do is wait for the expansion to come out. But that also means it's time to look at the full Wilds roster. Look at it, think about it, rotate it in your mind, and ultimately judge it. If you're not familiar with these videos, we're going to talk about each monster and then rank them on a very professional, highly analytic tier list. Behold. The categories this time are My Goat, Banger, Cool Guy, Not So Fond, and The Depths. Hopefully no one ends up there, we'll see. As for how we'll tackle the list of monsters, I'm going to go in ascending order, starting from the lower rank monsters you encounter early in the game, and moving up into the higher rank and endgame monsters. I don't think you can really rank every monster on a single list of criteria because they exist within different circumstances and fulfill different purposes. So we'll talk about the various methodology and reasonings as we go. We have a lot to get through though, so let's get to it. What better place to start at than Chatacabra? I already spoke about Chatacabra in my starter monster video, and my thoughts have largely not changed. Chatacabra is a very basic monster, as befitting its place in the game. It has several larger attacks that can deal a bit of damage if you're not dodging appropriately. It also attacks slow enough for a new player to practice some offset attacks and counters if they so choose. Chatacabra tutorializes the Focus Strike weak point mechanic as well for those paying attention. When it sticks its tongue out, that gives an opportunity for a Focus Strike, which is a mechanic you'll find often in later monsters. I think mechanically it's pretty interesting because it does have an actual gimmick. It can occasionally coat its arms in rocks that it can use to smack you around more effectively with, and then you can break them off with enough damage to stagger them. This is pretty basic, but a lot of very low-tier beginner monsters don't even get this much, so I think it's cool to see. It's also a good vector for later improvements to its moveset in Master Rank or future games. On top of all of this, it gets points for being a frog. It belongs in Cool Guy, I think. Next up we have Doshiguma, another monster you fight near the beginning of the game. So what does it offer to the starting experience? Doshiguma is what I'd call a tech demo monster. It displays two mechanics featured prominently in marketing for the game pre-launch. The first of which is wounding. Doshiguma is, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong here, the only monster that has a unique interaction with the wound mechanic, not counting guardians that just heal them faster, of course. When enraged, Doshiguma will actually reopen any previously sealed wounds you used, allowing you to focus strike them once more. This was of course often shown off in the marketing and showcases for the game, but it also tutorializes the wounding mechanic very well. The other major mechanic it has is pack behavior. Pack behavior is a mechanic I think the devs were quite proud of and really showed off quite a lot. It makes sense that Doshiguma was one of the monsters that you could fight in the demo, and one of the first monsters we saw when the game was first announced. Doshiguma is one of the handful of monsters in the game that will form into packs with an alpha that moves with them. It's taught to you immediately that large dung pods will let you disperse the pack if you don't want to deal with the whole group. I think Doshiguma is a very thematically consistent monster. It has the aesthetics of a bear and dog put together, and acts like one too. It's vicious and unpredictable. Ripping its own wounds open in rage gives it the vibe that you're really fighting a beast that's lashing out at you wildly. Its move that rips the whole ground up from under it can really catch you off guard and deal some serious damage. It's the first monster you encounter that can be a bit threatening, but it's got plenty of ways to knock it down and reduce its threat, so it's not too much to handle early in the game. However, I would say the pack mechanics are a bit underutilized, and essentially only serves a small aesthetic function. This goes for all pack monsters in the game, but it feels like a bit of a loss on Doshiguma since it really is set up as one of its defining features. I would say Doshiguma is a cool guy. Balahara is our next subject, the Sandworm. Balahara is the first very run-of-the-mill monster you fight. It hits you with its tail, it spits mud at you, it digs into the sand, it feels almost old school in some ways. I think it interestingly occupies a notable space within the Windward Plains ecosystem. You can find Balahara digging large sand pits that you or other monsters can fall into and get dragged down to the lower caves. It also uses a smaller form of this while fighting you that can sort of disrupt your footing and positioning, which is cool. While Balahara doesn't leave as strong of an impression as the previous monsters, I think it still has enough identity to justify its place in the roster. I think it also belongs in Cool Guy. Chemetris was a monster I was pretty excited about. I really like the way it's designed visually, and its equipment is also really cool. Chemetris is unfortunately a pretty big victim of Wild's early game balancing. When reviewing all the monsters for this video, I tried fighting them at the highest level I could find, so I could get a good feel for their fight, and Chemetris is one of the monsters that even then still sort of just falls over immediately and dies. Chatacabra somehow puts up more of a fight than Chemetris. It can run into you, or it can sweep its tail around to make fire. While Chemetris is an early game monster, compared to the other monsters you fight around the same time, it feels pretty lacking, which is compounded by the balance issues. And that's pretty disappointing because, like I said, I did really want to like it. Hopefully Master Rank will be kind. I'll have to put Chemetris into not so fond. We've had a lot of cool guys so far, but that makes sense, I think. The beginning monsters in any game generally don't stand out strongly. You expect them to be pretty middle of the road. Let's take a look at some of the later monsters and see how they shake things up. Rompopolo is a monster that stands out both visually and mechanically. With its sharp claws, elongated beak, beady red eyes, and inflatable sacs across its body, it makes a very strong first impression just from seeing it. Rompopolo is one of the first monsters you'll encounter that inflicts status, and it displays a number of unique mechanics. It has several ways to inflict you with poison, and can create blasts of air from under the ground by sticking its tail into the tar of the oil well basin. Not just to hit you, but also to create larger and more dangerous eruptions that you'll need to avoid. Upon hitting the inflated sacs enough, you can cause them to deflate, and Rompopolo will take on the appearance of a sopping wet cat and fall over in humiliation. This gives it an element of gap moe. Fighting it while it's all deflated makes you feel bad, but then it re-inflates and goes back to trying to explode you, so you snap out of it. This psychological attack adds to its cunning style. I think Rompopolo belongs in the banger tier. Kongolala is a beloved classic, or at least it's beloved by me. Wilds is Kongolala's modern generation debut, so I think it's fair to judge these types of monsters based on how they got tuned up from their previous old gen iterations. Interestingly, Kongolala sort of didn't get tuned up much at all, and that actually works fine. It's got all the classic attacks and mechanics it used to have, and since you fight it fairly early on in the game, it still doesn't feel too out of place. It's got its stink attacks, it jumps and runs at you to knock you around, it's got the variety of breath attacks gained by consuming the nearby mushrooms. Kongolala felt somewhat ahead of its time all the way back in Gen 2, so it makes sense that it makes for a decent modern generation monster. Plus, Kongolala already got a bit tuned up when it returned for 4th gen, and the Wilds iteration is largely just a continuation of that. Monsters that appeared in the 4th generation often have an advantage when returning in newer generations, because those games already did a lot of work to modernize and fix up the old monsters. For Kongolala, I'll put it in Cool Guy. Lalabarina is up next, and this is another monster I was very excited about. But unlike Chemetris, Lalabarina actually lived up to expectations, I think. Lalabarina has a fairly unique attacking style in that it sort of dances around you while attacking. This gives it a striking impact. It can spread what are effectively aerial mines that will give you paralysis on contact with them. It goes through two modes of either having the flower on its back open or closed. It can hit you with the stinger inside for some pretty good damage. One of the fun mechanics Lalabarina has is when it hangs from the ceiling to begin spreading its paralysis stuff. If you hit it enough while it's doing that, you can knock it down. I think being able to interrupt a monster's attack to create an opening is always fun. Lalabarina feels fairly indicative of where you begin crossing over into the more mid and later game monsters as you progress in low rank, because it's got a lot more going on than a lot of the monsters that came before. It's one of the monsters I'm still most excited about as we move into the expansion, because I think it has an extremely strong base for Master Rank improvements. I'm going to call Lalabarina a banger. Now we can talk about Lalabarina's Temnoceran cousin, Nursella. Nursella is another monster getting its modern debut, and it's got all the mechanics and attacks intact. It jumps around a lot, swings from webs, inflicts poison, and can hit you with its sleep stinger. Getting slept will cause it to attempt a follow-up, which will deal quite some damage. It also maintains its hit zone swapping effect. Nursella is a monster that wears the hide of preyed upon Gypceros on its body, which makes it immune to the thunder element, but weak to fire. Upon breaking this hide off, you will then be able to deal good thunder damage to its body directly. This is an interesting mechanic to have in Wild specifically, because unlike in the past, you can now actually bring two weapons to the hunt, and switch elements, if you so choose, to exploit changing weaknesses. Having an old mechanic be given new life by tying it into a totally new mechanic is very cool. I will say it does feel like they slowed Nursella down a bit from 4th gen, which I find a bit odd, but that's actually consistent with a number of returning monsters, so it seems like it was an intentional design goal in the game. One that feels largely unnecessary, as I'm sure most agree, but it's not unique to Nursilla. I'd say Nursilla is a cool guy in Wilds. Haribami is one of the more unique monster designs in the series, being a sort of flying ice element serpent. Using its clawed tail to attack you along with a variety of ice attacks, it can move around in the air to create a fairly dynamic fight. It will also sometimes land either on its own or from you knocking it out of the air to attack you on the ground with various tackles and tail swipes. This is where the fight begins to sort of fall flat, I think. While Haribami can be pretty threatening and fun to fight while it's in the air, its ground moveset leaves a lot to be desired, and it can end up spending quite a lot of time on the ground. This is an issue that I think is more pervasive in the recent games than just something that Haribami does wrong, but it feels like they're often afraid to make flying monsters actually fly and use it against you effectively. They had heard people complain about Azure Rathalos flying too much and decided to just ground every other flyer forever, which I think heavily neuters their moveset. Some monsters have still been able to work around this, but I think Haribami is not one of them. It has a good aerial moveset and a pretty bad grounded one. I think I would have liked it if it had spent more time flying and was harder to knock down. For these reasons, I'd put Haribami down in not so fond. As we move into the higher tier monsters, expectations increase. At this point in the game, you want monsters who are more solidly threatening and have interesting mechanics to contend with. It's easy for monsters here to end up being disappointing if they don't put up enough of a fight. Let's see what the Wilds roster has in store. Ajarikon is a brand new entry for the monkey scale. You do know about the monkey scale, right? And what a good design it is. A fire monkey is something we haven't seen before, so that's cool. Ajarikon takes from the Rajang school of fighting and pummels you with a variety of physical attacks, but also can use its abilities to create eruptions from the ground or lob fiery rocks at you, which can afflict you with blast. In certain areas of the oil well basin, it can hang from the ceiling, which is a neat bit of environmental interaction. Ajarikon is one of those monsters I've actually had my opinion on improved with time. Originally, I felt that it didn't quite live up to the hype. It felt like one of those monsters that died a little too soon. It didn't deal quite enough damage to live up to the aura it feels it should have. Thankfully, that was remedied by the 9-star event quest, where you get to fight it as it really always should have been. And it was there that I realized Ajarikon is one of the best fights in Wilds. Its moveset is actually quite threatening and difficult to deal with. It can pretty easily wombo combo you into the ground and send you back to camp. While it's a shame it took an event quest to make Ajarikon really shine, I think the fact that all it took was a simple stat increase emphasizes just how good the base design really is. I think for this reason, I'm willing to say Ajarikon is really my goat. The first of the video. Also, if we're going to put it on the monkey scale, it would go here. Next up we have Gravios, a Generation 1 returning monster and another modern generation debut. Gravios received a portion of its 4th generation moveset with its downwards beam, but largely kept to its original classic moveset of charging, sweeping beams, and tail swipes, with the occasional fire burst. It is also unfortunately a tragic victim of modern design. Gravios was a monster that was basically made of friction against the player. It had low hit zones, a huge amount of HP, essentially required bringing water element or a bowgun, and could easily kill those not paying attention with its bursts of fire that come with little warning after many of its attacks. The key gimmick was that you could break the chest twice to reveal an extremely weak hit zone that would allow you to usually pretty quickly finish up the hunt after exposing it. Breaking the chest at all was often a bit of a feat and took time, but without it you would spend most of the hunt dealing small amounts of damage or bouncing with most attacks, even with mid-level sharpness. Wild's Gravios has none of this. Breaking its chest doesn't even feel necessary. You can swing away at it all day and not worry about bouncing due to how much built-in mind's eye weapons have nowadays. Even when you do break the chest, it comes very quickly. It's not something you have to work at, and it dies very fast regardless. It only does its fire bursts when the player is certainly safely out of range. It's all around a monster that is completely toothless and devoid of any of its classic mechanics. Gravios was a chance for the game to make players actually contend with the monster on the monster's terms instead of getting a free ride to victory, and it failed the assignment. It is with great sadness that I must condemn Wild's Gravios to the depths. May it find salvation in Master Rank. We're going to talk about Gypsyros now. It's not exactly a high-tier threat, but I didn't talk about it before, so we're doing it now. Gypsyros is another first-gen returning monster, and one that I think survived the modern game transition better than Gravios. Gypsyros is one that got basically a full remake in 4th gen, and has kept most of that moveset in Wilds. Assaulting you with various poison attacks and funny tail whips, it also flashes you and will attempt to follow up while you're on the ground. It even kept the death fake out. A very faithful remaster of an old monster. I will say I'm not a big fan of what they've done to flash stun in Wilds. It feels like you really only get stunned for a moment compared to the full 5-second stun lock that you used to have to mash out of in older games. It really does feel like there's a trend of old-gen monster mechanics kind of getting sanitized when they enter Wilds. Overall though, I'd say Gypceros is a cool guy. For our third first-gen returning monster in a row, we have Yan-Kut-Ku. Strangely exclusive to high rank and yet not out of place. Somehow they made Kut-Ku into a real fight. Among these first-gen monsters getting updated for new games, it makes me wonder what the process is like for the developers. Monsters always get new moves and updated mechanics when they show up in a new game, but first-gen monsters are an interesting case because their baseline foundation is so simplistic. There isn't a lot to build on. In the case of Kut-Ku, its first-gen moveset consisted of a fireball, a tail swipe, and charging at you. I imagine it can be difficult to try to make a more modern and interesting fight design while still maintaining the identity of the monster, what little identity they may have considering the simplicity. The Wilds version of Kut-Ku is a case where it feels like they really excelled. Even its 4th gen iteration didn't feel like it had as much bite as the Wilds version. And perhaps this was from them making it a high rank monster instead of being balanced around early game. I think Wilds Kut-Ku is very fun to fight and can even be somewhat challenging when fighting the 9-star version. Its charging move that has truly insane tracking is a dastardly but enjoyable addition. It certainly deserves the rank of banger. Let's just get all the Gen 1 monsters out of the way. Rathian is up next. Compared to some of the other first-gen monsters we've already talked about, Rathian feels pretty mild. The Wraths are of course a mandatory inclusion in every game, and they're always looking for ways to spice up the same old hunt we always expect. In this regard though, Rathian didn't get much. It's got all the same moves it's had since 5th gen. In fact, I'd say Rathian is a monster who has pretty much completely stagnated since around 4th gen, but especially World. If it's not broken, don't fix it is the age-old saying though, and that does feel like it applies to Rathian. Wilds Rathian is a solidly good fight and pretty much plays exactly as you expect it to. That makes Rathian a cool guy, gender neutrally of course. Now on to Rathalos. The king's back, and with all the respect he deserves. I've been somewhat disappointed by the treatment of Rathalos for several games now. I know it's a bit of a meme that it's the eternal returning monster, but that's really just out of reverence for the series' history. And I think that's great. So I think if Rathalos is going to be in every game, they should give it the aura it deserves. Well, Wilds has delivered on that front. Mechanically sort of a combination of both its World and Rise iterations, taking some of the best parts of both, along with a whole new unique theme song when fighting that pays homage to its history, creates a very memorable battle for the ages. Adding to its aura, not only is it exclusive to high rank, but they even gave it a special 9-star version as well. I mentioned before about flying monsters not really getting to use flying against you very much, and Rathalos is one of the exceptions, where they found the right balance. Rathalos is the king of the skies, so having it not use many flying attacks would be absurd, but it's not a hindrance to fighting it. Even on the ground, Rathalos is still able to put up a fight, and it doesn't spend too long there before getting back into the air. I think it's great to see Rathalos back on top, and with a very fun fight to boot. I'm very pleased to bestow Rathalos with the rank of my goat. Shu Wu was a monster that surprised me, and I assume surprised many others. A monster that didn't appear in any marketing and showed up suddenly in the story with no build-up. I think many people expected new Udra would be the only cephalopod in Wilds, but Shu Wu showed Wilds has some tricks up its sleeve. It has a surprisingly cunning and devious moveset, dexterously using its tentacles to swipe and stab at you, augmented with the strange golden blades it creates. It can additionally leap into the air and throw these blades at you like knives, or lunge at you suddenly for quick attacks. This gives it the impression of a skilled assassin. Aside from its mechanics, I think its visual design is also very enjoyable and cool. Many criticized World for its abundance of wyverns, and I think Wilds did a fantastic job of rectifying that, and giving us many new and interesting types of monsters, such as the cephalopods. The only real disappointment, I think, is that it didn't get a higher rank version to make it a tougher fight, though in comparison to its original launch peers, I think it stands out as one of the harder and more engaging fights. It just hasn't aged well with the title updates. I'll put Shu Wu in banger, I think. On to Blanganga, a Gen 2 returning monster this time, not Gen 1. Consult the monkey scale so you know where we are. Blanganga is a bit confusing in Wilds, I feel. Classically, it's been sort of a mid-tier threat. Its main way of fighting you effectively was essentially to crowd control you with the snowball status and tremors, leaving you open to getting attacked by the Blongos that it summons or a quick follow-up attack. It was a monster that was fairly easy to avoid the attacks of, but getting caught up in a loop of getting snowballed, hit, and then trying to heal could quickly become a very deadly situation. In Wilds, much of this has been lost due to no longer being able to effectively crowd control you. Even in its higher rank quest where it actually deals damage, it feels like it didn't gain anything to make up for the things it lost. There are a number of places in Wilds where similar things have happened, so I think they should really be less afraid to mechanically disadvantage the player, especially as punishment for getting hit during a fight beyond just taking damage. Blanganga in Wilds feels like it's stuck between changing too much and not changing enough. Many of its attacks are the same as they've always been, and yet they took out certain key components as well. It should have either gotten a full remake from scratch or not changed at all. I don't hate Blanganga in Wilds. It is still fairly fun to fight, it's just sort of disappointing when looking at its past. For this reason, it will avoid the depths and go into not so fond. Capping off the normal base game monsters, we have Gore Magala. As a fan of 4 Ultimate, Gore Magala in Wilds really pleased me. I was somewhat disappointed by its inclusion in Rise. It didn't receive many changes, and it sort of just got thrown into the roster. In Wilds, however, not only was it an actual part of the story, but it got a pretty noticeable update to its fight. It's now significantly faster and more dynamic than it used to be, being able to fly and charge around the field with startling speed and follow up with deadly frenzy attacks. It's been discussed to death, of course, about the difficulty of Wilds' original launch experience, but Gore Magala is one I feel did not suffer from this. Even at launch, it was a pretty challenging fight, and it has even aged well into the title updates. The Frenzy Virus mechanic returns as expected, where you need to deal damage while infected to cure it and gain a buff, or otherwise fail and take additional damage for a while. It's one of the few places in Wilds where you'll really want to be holding on to some nullberries. Something I think about with returning monsters is like, if this was someone's first time encountering this monster, what impression would it leave? Especially for monsters I like from the older games, is this iteration of it likely to make new players also like this monster? Take Ravios, for example. I feel like if Wilds is someone's first time fighting it, they probably have a very poor impression of it, which is unfortunate. I don't believe this is the case with Gore Magala. If Wilds is your first time encountering it, I can imagine the impression is quite positive. Gore Magala in Wilds is a true upgrade with very little negative to say about it, and I'm very excited to see how it will look in Master Rank. Gore Magala is my goat. Just as a quick aside, this is by far my longest video and one I've put the most amount of effort into, so if you're enjoying it at this point, I would appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe if you're not already. It helps me out a lot and lets me know if I should make more videos like this one. Thanks. Anyway, we've not talked about any Guardian monsters yet at all, so let's take a look at them now. I think it makes sense to talk about the Guardians as a group, since they share many similarities, and point out any notable parts of each one, and then rank them all at once. The Guardians are an interesting experiment and something of a first for the series. They're essentially like a group of themed pseudo-subspecies, and in the case of Ebony Odogaron and Fulgur Anjanath, they're like a subspecies of a subspecies, which I think was an intentional choice to really emphasize how unusual and unique they are. Each of the Guardians have new moves compared to their base forms, but the main difference is their ability to create Wilk crystals and eruptions with some of their attacks. For monsters such as Ebony Odogaron, Fulgur Anjanath, and Rathalos, this also means they can detonate the crystals with their elemental attacks, creating additional hazards you need to look out for. Doshaguma is the only one that isn't able to actually use its own Wilk crystals, and instead just has many physical attacks and Wilk explosions. Another mechanic they all share is the ability to rapidly heal their wounds. This is really interesting because compared to the other base game monsters who tended to get glued to the floor from repeated wound popping, the Guardians are notably not as susceptible to this. They essentially counter one of the main new ways the game gives you to fight monsters with, and they feel more difficult as a result. It's hard to compare monsters like Fulgur and Ebony to their original base forms since they're from a different game, but in the case of Guardian Rathalos, in some ways it feels like a further upgrade from its base form in Wilds. It still has all the same moves, but now it can create devastating Wilk explosions as well. I think overall the Guardians resulted in interesting remixes of the base monsters. Within the Guardian group, Doshaguma is the only one that I think doesn't quite match up to the rest, but comparing it to the base Doshaguma, it's certainly an improvement. Okay, let's run down the list. Guardian Rathalos. Good fight. Probably my favorite of the Guardians. It would be unfair, I think, to say an imitation is on the same level as the original, so I'll say it's a banger. Guardian Fulgur Anjanath. I'm already a big fan of Fulgur from Iceborne, and I think it's the superior Anjanath, and the Guardian form just makes it better. Banger. Guardian Ebony Odogaron. Similar situation to Fulgur. Superior Odogaron and a good fight in wilds. Banger. And finally, Guardian Doshiguma. Good dog. Not as good as the others. Cool guy. Moving on to the Apex monsters, we've got Raidao. I remember when Wilds was first shown off, people thought Raidao was the flagship because of how much aura it carried. And while that didn't end up being the case, its aura was never diminished. The Apexes occupy a spot as being sort of a capstone final boss for each region, and while you do fight them at varying points throughout the main story, their highest tier endgame versions still hold up quite well. Raidao is the first one that you fight, and so you could expect it to be the simplest, but I don't think that's the case. I think Raidao is still one of the most interesting fights in the game. While it is a bit slow, its deadly lightning strikes that can nuke large areas and sweeping wing attacks create plenty of dynamic moments. I'd like to draw attention to this flying wing attack specifically. I think this is one of the coolest flying attacks in the whole series. Despite Raidao largely just being a normal flying wyvern, I think they did a really good job of giving it a unique vibe and an attacking style. The overall atmosphere of fighting it during the Stand Tide also adds a lot to the fight. All the Apexes are fought during their respective inclemency period, but I think Raidao benefits from it the most. The low visibility, gale force winds, and constant lightning strikes only add further aura to Raidao, and thus I will put it in my GOAT. Uthduna is the next Apex you fight. It's a large fish that flops on you. What more needs to be said? But really, that is probably its most identifiable aspect. I said before that Raidao is not the simplest of the Apexes because that title actually goes to Uthduna, I think. Its attacking style is very straightforward. It flops on you, slides across the ground at you, and sends large waves around in places with water. There is sort of an element of comedy to Uthduna when you see it heave its giant body up into the air to pancake you into the ground. How does it do that? In a way, Uthduna is kind of the opposite of Raidao. It has negative aura. That doesn't make it a bad monster, though. I think the wave mechanic is really cool. There's never been many, maybe any actually, that work by just moving the player around. They don't deal much damage, but they do swish you around, and especially on shield weapons, they can be really disruptive to your positioning, and can take you very far away from the monster. Overall, though, I would say Uthduna doesn't quite end up being as exciting as some other monsters. It really is just a fish that flops on you, and I think as an Apex, that ends up being a bit of a detriment. I'll say Uthduna is a cool guy. New Udra, the other cephalopod added in Wilds. A fire octopus that lives in oil has got to be one of the most fascinating monster concepts in the series. And not just that it uses fire attacks, but it literally sets itself on fire while fighting you. New Udra is sort of a technical marvel for the series as well, with its many tentacles that can all be cut off, the way its sensory organs on the tentacles light up to telegraph incoming attacks, and how it squeezes into cracks in the rocks to burst out elsewhere. They really pulled out all the stops when designing New Udra. The way it attacks you is predominantly through hitting you with its tentacles, but it can also throw fireballs at you or create a big flamethrower. It also has one of the more brutal grabs in the series where it holds you up and barbecues you at point-blank range. I've always found New Udra to be probably the most difficult of the Apexes to fight. I've never been able to get a proper read on how to tell what it's going to do and how to avoid it. So I spend a lot of time getting thrashed about, which in the highest ranked quests will get you killed pretty fast. I think this is actually pretty thematically appropriate, regardless of whether I'm just getting skill issued or not. Banger monster. Jindahad is the last of the Apexes, the Heat Sink Wyvern. What an absolutely wild visual design. I still don't fully understand how it's supposed to work, but that's not my job. All I know is that it's really cool. I think it's very fitting that Jindahad is the one Apex to get its own special arena. It's a borderline siege fight with a variety of mechanics to work with. You've got rocks to dump on its head, the giant structures it climbs that you can use to pull it down, and the big ultimate attack that you need to hide behind rocks to survive. That's becoming a bit of a staple in Monster Hunter, it seems. It's also got that part with the Hirabami invade. Such an interesting fight. It actually has a lot of attacks, too. The Frost Breath, the Icy AoEs, charging across the arena, various claw swipes, tail swipes, and so forth. You can topple it by breaking each of its parts on its 4 legs, tail, and head, and then break the lower back. Doing all this will then let you also break the upper back. There's such a crazy amount of stuff packed into this monster. It feels like a whole boss fight, and it's not even the penultimate fight in the story. I guess this is where all of Uthduna's non-fish flopping mechanics went. Not all apexes are created equal, and it shows. I'm gonna have to put Jindahad in my goat next to Raydown. And now we can finally talk about the flagship of wilds, Arkveld. What metric should you judge a flagship by? Just as a monster in the game? Its role in the story? In comparison to other flagships? Something I like to see out of flagship monsters is unique mechanics and an interesting visual design. Truthfully, I don't really care how they fit into the story that much. In that regard, I think Arkveld was fine anyway. I'm a pretty mechanical and gameplay-oriented player, and I feel somewhat mixed on Arkveld. There seems to be a trend for a while now of flagships with really fantastical and over-the-top abilities and designs. The last pretty normal flagship we got was Nergigante, as a monster that just punches you in the face. Visually, Arkveld looks like it should be some kind of bruiser, but in reality it's also a crazy, flipping around laser explosion monster. I think there's kind of a disconnect between how it looks and what it actually does when fighting it. Visually, I think the chains look a little goofy, but those are also its defining feature and the main way it uses its attacks. So in the end, I feel sort of middling on Arkveld. I think it's a good fight, but perhaps disappoints slightly in the role of a flagship. I'll put it in cool guy. Now is probably a fine time to talk about the Arch-tempered monsters. We can probably run through these pretty quick since they're just remixes of the base versions. When looking at Arch-tempered monsters, I think the things to consider are, do they provide a notable distinction and or improvement from the base version? Arch-tempered monsters should be at least a little more challenging than the base monster, and should provide a fun remix of the mechanics with some new stuff sprinkled in. Arch-tempered Raidao is a baseline of what a good Arch-tempered monster should look like, I think. It covers for the weaknesses of the base version, with new lightning AoEs and follow-ups on its attacks that force you to fight it a little differently, while also being notably more difficult as well. It's a simple mechanical upgrade, but effective. As an Arch-tempered monster, I think Raidao is a banger. What's not a banger is Arch-tempered Uthduna. Literally, its whole bit is that it just flops and slides on you more than normal. If there was ever an Arch-tempered monster that was actively less fun than its base version, it's Uthduna. To the depths. Now for an Arch-tempered monster that is actually a total upgrade in every way possible from its base version, you can look at New Udra. For the simple reason of Heat Aura. I'm actually genuinely surprised they put something like this in Wilds, because it feels at odds with the ease of gameplay they've been going with in the rest of the game. Having a monster that just rapidly depletes your HP by standing next to it unless you counter it with skills is awesome. It also has several other new attacks like the big oil bomb that just kills you if you're trying to play defensively with a shield. This is a great monster. More of this please. My goat. Jindahad is a pretty mild remix of the base version, new breath attacks and follow-ups, and a persistent ice area denial sort of thing. It doesn't particularly change the way you approach the monster, but it's still notably different. Cool guy. And finally, Arch-tempered Arkveld. This is pretty interesting because honestly, Arch-tempered Arkveld is kind of a whole new monster. It goes beyond being a remix and acts more like a variant, having a whole new phase of its fight with completely new abilities. It's also drastically more difficult than the base version. In some ways it feels like the true Arkveld, which I think is sort of what they were going for. Combining the elements of both normal Arkveld and Guardian Arkveld to create what I think is actually a pretty banger monster. Okay, we're in the home stretch. All that's left is the title update monsters. Let's go. First up, we have Zoshia. I've talked about Zoshia on the channel before, and my thoughts have certainly not changed. This is one of the coolest monsters in the series, being essentially an amalgamation of various powerful Elder Dragons, including Fatalis, and bringing those abilities together to create a real spectacle of a fight, but also one that is not a pushover. I think something Monster Hunter has struggled with in recent entries to the series is that they want the end bosses to be big spectacles with cool cinematic moments that fill you with hype and awe, but that tends to come at the cost of making the fight interesting or challenging from a mechanical standpoint. They often feel very formulaic and simple. Zoshia avoids this entirely, I think. Not only is it very much a spectacle, the first time seeing it stand up and rain lightning down upon the field is one of the most unforgettable memories in the series for me. But it's also a fair challenge. The original high-rank version was one of the more difficult fights in the game at the time. I did the 10-star version and it tripled me out of the quest like 3 times. Zoshia is my goat for sure. Mizitsune is, to me, the least interesting of the Fated Four. And I know that's not a dominant opinion. Many people like Mizitsune. I just think it's a little boring compared to others. However, Wilds did something very unusual. Wilds' Mizitsune is like a proto-Soulseer. In Generations Ultimate, many monsters got deviant forms, which are essentially superpowered variants, and the one for Mizitsune was called Soulseer. Deviants have often been treated sort of as a separate category of monster from usual variants and subspecies, but with Wilds, we've seen the first synthesis of a base form and a deviant. In Wilds, Mizitsune starts in its base form, and then upon breaking its head, it will begin unleashing new Soulseer-like abilities. I think this is great because it really spiced up the otherwise quite plain fight. I had originally questioned adding Mizitsune as a title update monster. It didn't seem that worthy of an update to me, but I was very much proven wrong. I'd say Wilds' Mizitsune is a banger. Lagiacrus, the one everyone has been clamoring for. The elusive monster they've been trying to add for multiple games, and it only finally just worked out. I myself am a big Lagiacrus fan. I was also clamoring for it to come back. 3rd Gen Laggy is a really fun and cool monster. GU had Laggy in it, but since there was no underwater combat, it was landlocked, and in my opinion was a very poor iteration. Wilds brought back Laggy with an actual underwater section, which I think is awesome. It's what Laggy always deserves. Mechanically, this version of Laggy is quite good, I think. It retains much of its old moveset, with some newer additions. It can be rather difficult at times with its large lightning nukes. Large lightning nukes, what the fuck, and very quick multi-hit combos and follow-ups. The underwater section is where I think this version falls flat a little. While I do of course appreciate that they gave it an underwater segment at all, the gameplay of shooting it with the slinger and lashing onto it is a little bare bones and I think gets old pretty fast on subsequent fights. And unfortunately, this part of the fight is basically completely scripted. It is possible to kill it before it goes to the nest, but on an average hunt you're going to be doing this part of the fight every single time. And I do think this does drag it down a fair bit. It's a difficult position because I would not want a version of this fight that doesn't have the underwater portion, but the one that we got isn't very good. I think I'll say Lagiacrus is a cool guy. Seregios is next, the good man Steve. I gotta ask, why does Seregios keep showing up in games only to have zero real impact? The same thing happened in Sunbreak. Its fight is very mediocre, honestly. It's one of the most sauceless flagship monsters, and its gear in the modern games isn't even good. Does anyone actually use Seregios equipment? When I went through and fought all the monsters again for this video, I think it was like the 2nd or 3rd time I had ever fought Seregios in the game. They won't even give it a subspecies or a variant, which it probably desperately needs. Bleed is, I think, the most inconsequential status in the series. You don't even notice it half the time, and the methods to cure it are weird and specific. And to top it off, in Wild specifically, they slowed Seregios down quite a lot. Seregios classically has been quite fast, but in Wilds it winds up its attacks like an Elden Ring boss. What are we even doing here? Not so fond. I'm gonna rank Omega because it is technically a monster in the game. I've historically been a big Final Fantasy XIV player, and I was pretty excited to see Omega come to Monhan. I know the collab monsters have been a bit controversial, and Omega was not spared from this for being another raid boss fight shoved into Monhan, which some people consider jarring or not suitable. But honestly, I think they really knocked it out of the park with Omega. As a Final Fantasy XIV player, I think they adapted its mechanics to Monhan pretty well, and as a Monhan player, the fight itself is just well made. It feels very fair, and with the help of the support hunters, you don't even need to rely on players to lock in for 30 minutes. Seriously, the support hunters are better than real players a lot of the time. It's crazy. The way they tied the wounding mechanic into the fight is cool and creative, and the Savage version specifically is truly an absolute monster of difficulty. I think all around, Omega ended up being one of the most fun fights in Wilds. Banger. Last, and perhaps least, we have Gogmazios. A lot of people had already suspected Gogmazios might come to Wilds because of the Oil Well Basin, and they were right. The final update monster of Wilds. Does it live up to that expectation? Gogmazios is one of my favorite final boss monsters in the series back in 4 Ultimate, so I was pretty excited to see it come to Wilds. In 4 Ultimate, Gogmazios was one of those monsters that balanced spectacle and mechanical excellence. Sadly, that did not transfer to Wilds. Wilds Gog is kind of a complete catastrophe, I think. turned into a 3 separate phase fight, only one of which has you actually fighting it normally. The first phase is actually reminiscent of the original fight, but then you get up on the ledge and have to play with the big cannon. I do think the mechanic of charging the cannon is cool, but sadly this phase ends pretty quickly once you fire it, so it's really just there for show. Then the final phase starts where it's flying around, and they've decided to add a Dragon Damage Eschaton Judgment DPS check for some reason. That wouldn't be so bad if that was all, but instead the main way you interact with this part of the fight is with special slinger ammo you throw at it while it's flying around. Again, what are we even doing here? All spectacle, little substance. So much hype moments and aura, they forgot to add a real fight to the monster. Whoopsies. To the depths. Alright, well that's all the monsters in Wilds, so what have we learned? The average monster in Wilds trends quite high actually, with a lot of monsters in the upper tiers and even the lesser ones tend to congregate in the middle. Only a few monsters were bad enough to make it down into the lowest tiers. A very solid showing from Wilds, both in the base game and the title updates. I think this bodes very well for the eventual expansion lineup and the form those monsters will take. Thank you for watching. If you actually stuck around this long for some reason, I'll never do a video this long again. Don't quote me on that. See ya.